Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. I would first of all like to thank you for the invitation for the organizers, the Macedonian Center for Research and Policy Making. I believe that this would be a very useful exercise for all of us, including myself, as I'm not a person who has any background in civil society activities. However, I will try to focus on the European agenda that Macedonia is working on quite intensively in the past years, and on the fact that increased transparency in this context can only bring some added value and can be an extra motivation on the road that is certainly a complicated one and that involves many factors in it, especially after a country starts the process of accession negotiations. Macedonia has been for 7 years a candidate country. As a candidate, probably one of the advantages that you have is that you're increasingly exposed to member states, and you're increasingly exposed to your own civil society. One of the major achievements of Macedonia in the past period has been the recommendation to start accession negotiations. My strong belief is that with the start of the accession negotiations, this pressure on exposure on member states, as much as exposure to civil society representatives within the country, will further increase and will clearly add a new element, which is the element of delivering on concrete results which are linked to fulfilling membership requirements. I had an opportunity to participate in one of the major initiatives that has started with the United States and Brazil, starting the Open Government Initiative, in which Macedonia has joined from the very beginning. And we have understood from the very beginning that we have a number of requirements that we will have to fulfill, requirements that will be certainly helpful to Macedonia heading to start of accession negotiations. This means increased transparency. It means also certain accountability on a number of issues that would be relevant in the process of accession talks, and it means also an increased level of inclusiveness. Why am I mentioning this initiative? I would say that what matters even more than the accession process is the global scale of transparency that has been increased. It goes without saying that that would be certainly correlated to the level of awareness of people and to the level of their motivation to challenge governments, ask for information, be able to pursue an analysis on the basis of it, and come up with the concrete suggestions on what can be improved on the process, in the process of democratic development in a country. We are a country with a rather short experience in terms of democratic practices, but one of the things that we have learned first was the fact that citizens ask governments to be increasingly transparent. It has been the case throughout the governments, and it has been also the case that more and more citizens are able to pursue this kind of analysis and come up with the concrete suggestions on what should be done, how it should be done, what are different policy alternatives, and they would like to make governments accountable. My strong belief is that with the start of accession negotiations, we will go to a next stage, which will be a stage of full inclusiveness and a requirement from people to participate in a process that is quite demanding. It has been a logical pattern since the very beginning and since the first wave of the enlargement of the then European communities back in the 70s that not always all citizens were able to understand the purpose of a certain process. I believe it has been very complicated to explain, for example, to French citizens that the membership of the United Kingdom in the community will have an added value. As much as it was complicated to justify to British citizens that getting together with people on the continent and forging a common project will have an added value. However, now we are in a completely different stage. It has been precisely the case with practically all of the enlargement processes. I would mention here the 80s, when Spain, Portugal, and Greece have joined the European Union. All of them having a quite recent past of passing through dictatorships. Then the 90s, when Scandinavian countries having a much higher level of, well, two Scandinavian and one Central European country have joined the European Union, having much higher standard than the average of the then European Union. As much as the most recent cycles of 2004 and 2007, when you got in the club countries which were largely below the average of the wealth of the then members of the European Union. So this sort of differences in background, in approach, let's say, to things, or democratic practices for a longer or shorter period of time, have brought people on board on the basis of transparent platforms and on the basis of an open dialogue. This is not going to change. We've seen the debate that has been steered in our neighborhood, in Croatia, for example, heading ahead to the full membership next year. And we will certainly have this sort of debate being steered here in Macedonia, but also in the other candidate and potential candidate countries. What I believe is essential is, on one side, to make sure that government representatives increase the level of communication on explaining to citizens and to the public what really matters about the membership in the European Union. On the other side, it will be very important, and I would say rather challenging, to keep the interests of the citizens of the current European Union on why they would like to see the rest of us from the Balkans join the club. This communication involves actors from both sides, but it also depends pretty much on the level of commitment that we will have. It's not going to be easy. Currently in Macedonia, the main debate we are having is about the fact that we definitely deserve to start these accession talks, but we shouldn't ignore the fact that after starting them, it will require a tremendous amount of energy that is not going to happen on its own. It would mean that Macedonia will probably have the easiest, from a perspective of the challenges that is overcoming before starting the accession negotiations, the easiest context of accession talks. There are several objective reasons for that. One of them is the fact that we have been a longer standing candidate country. Probably the only benefit from staying in the waiting room for 7 years in practice is the fact that you've seen all of these processes from the outside. You had time to observe and to gather some administrative institutional memory, and this will certainly help you in handling the files that will come up in the coming period. Another advantage is the fact that probably our citizens are pretty much realistically looking into what is waiting for us on the other side of the door. It means that they're more realistic about the fact that joining the European Union does not mean that someone else is going to come in and solve all of your issues. It is rather other way around, meaning you will constantly be challenged to show capacity that you can handle the challenges that you might have in a regional context, in a national context, in a European context, as a matter of fact. And you have less illusions about Europe being this Santa Claus that offers gifts around Christmas, but all around the year. And actually, thanks to these gifts, you will be able to somehow manage all of the remaining challenges. I'm saying this being fully aware that it can be interpreted in a manner that, well, finally, it is so challenging that we do not know whether we are up to the task as a society in general. But my position on that is that I have no doubt about it. The fact that you're able to organize sort of debates that are happening on a daily basis in Macedonia on different kinds of issues, no matter how much divisive or inclusive the results of it can be, as a matter of fact, is something that we take for granted. We have another advantage, which is the fact that most of the difficult files have been handled in Macedonia already at an earlier stage. So frankly speaking, I think that very few issues will be left for the accession negotiations talks. And finally, the accession talks have lost somehow their two-way street concept. And I think that these days, considering the level of the acquis and the scope of it, it is more of a fulfilling of requirements than negotiating, even though the term is accession negotiations. In practice, you do not negotiate on much. You do deliver on fixed results that you have to in order to fulfill what is a common denominator in terms of European acquis. I would strongly encourage, if I had a stake in the civil society, in the public opinion making on these issues, to stimulate more of a debate, but to come up with more of a concrete proposals. Most of the times what comes out of all sorts of debates is just an observation, and we have serious difficulties to formulate policy alternatives. And this is what really matters. This will become the most important item of our accession negotiations, and most probably it will determine the dynamics of how quickly we will get into full membership once we start it. I would just mention another aspect, and that is the fact that in our case this is not a decision that has been made. It is something on which we have presented all of our arguments on our side, saying that Macedonia has been able to deliver and deserves to start this accession talks process. And we have presented also the argument that having a certain maturity level within the society means that the accession talks can only help us into overcoming all of the other current challenges, including the bilateral ones. That is a principle, as a matter of fact, that has been respected in all previous enlargement processes. And in my view, it is something that can help us in the current stage in overcoming all of the differences that are remaining in our Balkan landscape. I will try to wrap up here and leave more space for your questions, those of your interest, as I imagine that you have many of them. Probably this will be the most useful way to proceed. Thank you very much.